welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
I welcome you to a two-week series entitled Personal and Professional Growth. These programs have been made possible by the Women's Forum in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. They have recently had their 8th annual conference, which is simply an outstanding conference each year, and they've been very kind and supportive to permit us to have some of their keynote speakers as guests on this program. On the first of the two-week series, I'm very pleased to welcome to the program two guests. First, to my far left is Diana Gilmore. Diana Gilmore is the president of Noesis, a firm dedicated to helping people adapt to change, increase their skills in risk-taking, and take steps to achieve their dreams. Our guest has 10 years' experience as a highly creative and innovative teacher, and she also has 5 years' experience in public relations training. Her topic at the conference has been risk-taking, how to leap into space and still keep one foot on the ground. We're very delighted to have Diana Gilmore here, and we will talk some about those changes in just a few minutes.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're also very pleased to have Dr. Elizabeth Ann Zinser. Dr. Zinser became the 14th president of the University of Idaho a short time ago, and she is one of the very few presidents of land-grant institutions in this country that are women, and we're very delighted that there's been this breakthrough in the state of Idaho. President Zinser earned her doctorate in educational psychology from the University of California at Berkeley in 1972. She also holds a master's degree in nursing from the University of California at San Francisco. She has a baccalaureate degree in the same discipline from Stanford University, and in 1981 she returned to school for her master's in management at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. You certainly are highly qualified to speak to a number of issues and certainly serve as president of the University of Idaho. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for inviting me.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Dr. Zinser, let's start with you. What changes are occurring in the role of traditional roles of women in society? What do you see as being the changes?
I think the changes are dramatic, and they have been, particularly in the last 10 years, with women increasingly moving into fields in education and in society in general that are not traditionally held by women. Women are progressing in the career ladder, if you will, very nicely, and I think sometimes at the upper levels it occurs more readily than it does in the mid-levels. And one of the things that we need to give some special attention to in our institutions is preparing women for leadership and managerial roles in the mid-level area, so that there are more women available for selection when they are seeking to achieve opportunities for leadership in the higher levels of administration. So I think we're seeing tremendous change, and gradually I think women moving into these roles are learning to have more confidence in the special ways of thinking and the special attributes that they bring to their job, rather than just trying to adjust to the dominant culture that they're joining.
And what does this have to do then with the family, and what does this have to do with the traditional roles? How does these two things interact? How do they?
Well, one of the most fascinating things that I've been working with recently that relates to your question is a manuscript that's being put together by the Association of Governing Boards and the American Council on Education called Private Lives, Public Roles, discussing the life of presidents and recognizing that presidents are far more varied in their backgrounds today than they ever have been. That there are single women like myself, there are single men, there are married women presidents, there are married men presidents, and so on. They're quite a variety, and so this work is making an attempt to survey a large number of presidents across all sectors of higher education to get an understanding on that question. And indeed, the lives of presidents are changing as a function of the fact that presidents are becoming more diverse in their backgrounds. It's not typically the male president married to an individual who chooses to be the supportive person in the home with 4 little children running around the president's house. So presidents continue to be individuals that live in big houses and go out and raise a lot of money, or as some of us like to say, beg for a living. But and that's true no matter what your gender or your marital status, you continue to do that job. But there's a very large public role associated with the presidency of a university, and the way in which that's carried out by presidents that come to the role from different life positions is now being examined quite closely, and I've enjoyed being a part of that study.
Diana, what risks then are associated as women enter what we might call non-traditional fields? What risks are associated with that?
Well, I think part of that is being comfortable with giving up the old roles, the traditional roles, the ones that we, particularly if people, women about my age, let's say, who grew up in the old system, but at this particular age, I have an opportunity to change if I so choose. I think that in adapting to change, we really have to very carefully examine what's happening and what the benefits are to either adapt to the new system or stay with the old system. And those elements of coming to the conclusion of what is really best for us and assuming the responsibility in our individual roles and whatever our lifestyle might be, I think those are the aspects of change that we predominantly have to consider.
I would like to ask a series of questions that deal with risk-taking, and both of you are certainly great examples of individuals who've been very, very successful, but those successes don't come without some risk. I guess my first question is rather for both, it's across the gender gap, as one might say, whether it be a woman or a man, what makes it so difficult for individuals to step forward, or I guess I'll ask it another way, why are some people much more willing to be risk takers than others? And Diana, I'll start with you.
Well, I think part of that is how we grow up. Whether we've had supporting adults in our lives who have encouraged us to step out, to expand our horizons, those adults can show us that we are good at growing and adapting, and that we're always going forward. And I think if we start with those caring adults in our lives, that we are apt to be better risk takers as we grow up. It's also true that we make choices as we go along at every age, and we can choose to confront risk a little at a time. I think that's one of the things that also helps us to be better risk takers. Once we assume responsibility for the risk-taking process and realize that no one else is responsible for that but us ourselves, then I think we begin to gain the confidence as adults that make the whole business of being out there in front and taking that leap more successfully and more easily.
Dr. Zinsser, Diana has indicated that if one has that family background, it's more easy. But what do you do with individuals who've not had that kind of family background? How do you convince them that there's something out there on the horizon for them if they'll take the risk?
I don't know how to respond to that from the point of view of saying, how do you take someone and teach them how to take risk? That's Diane's expertise, but I can respond in another way, and that is one of the things that for me has, I think, helped me a great deal in learning to take risks, apart from having had a very supportive family, is the sense of adventure. And that comes from simple things growing up, like climbing a mountain and having that enormous sense of exhilaration and making it to the top of a 12,000-foot mountain and feeling that physical and emotional and spiritual kind of exhilaration that comes with being in the mountains and achieving something. And then as I grew older, learning what I wanted to make where I wanted to make a contribution, what I cared about, and where I wanted to do something. So today, I think those kinds of things came together to make it possible for me to take risks, because I don't focus on the risks as much as I'm focusing on what am I trying to do, and I have a sense of direction, a sense of a goal, but I also am yearning for that sense of exhilaration and having achieved something, having done something that would leave this place in better condition than I found it. And that drive, I think, makes it possible to take risks, not because you're focusing on the risks so much, but because you're focusing so intently on what you're trying to do and the sense of personal satisfaction in achieving it. Now, of course, I think you have to have a real strong support system growing up to have that. And those that do not have that in their natural family, I think it's very important to find that elsewhere, whether it's in 4-H or in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or churches. It's very important for our society today more than ever before, as family structures are changing, to provide in-school and out-of-school opportunities for young people to grow up with that kind of confidence.
Unfortunately, I think we're still at that point in the evolution of change that in some fields, such as your field as president of a land-grant institution, or I'm thinking of a particular person in the state who's involved in elective office, who's a woman, it seems to me that it's still at that point of double standards, that you have to succeed at a higher level than a man. In other words, sometimes you have to perform at a much higher level, or there's still individuals with a bias and prejudice saying, see, I told you so. So am I correct to say that there's even an additional pressure upon women in some fields yet in risk-taking to be the pioneer in the field?
I think so. I think there is some of that there, but I have to say that one of my my own defenses, I guess, in that regard is not to focus on it a whole lot. Every once in a while someone will say to me, particularly a woman, you've got to succeed. You can't fail because you're in it for us. And there's a part of me that wants to say, yes, you know, that gives me some sense of responsibility. On the other hand, we all share that responsibility. And my role in being president of the university is not to succeed for anybody other than for the university. And I have to stay focused on that and why I'm there and not allow myself to be too encumbered with other risks, while at the same time I recognize there is a special responsibility there, and I'm willing to assume that.
I think that's really one of the issues that in risk-taking, no matter what the size of the risk is, and certainly as women, if they advance in various professional areas, and that's assuming the responsibility of the success of the individual person. And I think once we realize that only I am responsible for my process in life, that it's not my parents' responsibility, it's not my spouse's responsibility. There's the things that I do or don't do are not the result of the action of others, but of choices that I make. And I think that all of us who are pacing ourselves through one profession or another, or one lifestyle or another, have do so successfully once you decide that the responsibility to gain what it is you're going for is yours alone.
That's right. And I think we can be role models for one another in the way of inspiring people, and we can be mentors for one another in helping to guide people to opportunities for success, but we cannot be success for anyone else.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
Diana, I would like to ask you, how do you encourage young women or women of my age to make a change? What kinds of steps do you work through with them in making changes?
Well, the first step, and I think it's always the hardest step, and that's to decide what it is you really want. And I think a lot of times we say, well, gee, I don't know what I really want. And that's kind of a cop-out, because that means I don't have to think the process through and take the steps to make whatever I want actually happen. So you need to decide what you want. And the one that I always find, because I'm an optimist and I anticipate that success is just going to happen, I think is to do your homework, to really look at the process, say, now what are the pluses here, what are the minuses here, who are the people I need to know, what steps do I need to take, what resources do I need to gather, and look at the whole process as, well, I hesitate to say an assignment, but essentially a whole package that I need to study. Then to look at, what are my priorities? What is really most important here? Because if my priorities say to me, well, right now, Diana, your major priority is your home and family, that's a perfectly legitimate choice. I don't have to go out and slay dragons right at this time. I may choose to do that later. And we're never locked into one choice. You know, life progresses at fits and starts, and it's never even. And so at this moment, I may choose to stay at home and raise my children, and a little later on, I may choose to do something else. And then finally, I think a step that is really most helpful is to look at the worst case scenario. What is the worst possible thing that could happen if I take this leap? What could happen that would really sort of destroy the plans I'm so carefully laying? And when you look at that and you say, can't live with that. No, this is one of those things I really can't do. You know, it's whether you decide to pass a speeding car on a hill. Am I willing to take the risk of the worst case scenario? And if the answer is no, that's perfectly a legitimate choice. If the answer is yes, what it does is it empowers us hugely to go ahead, gives us a sense of confidence. We know we're prepared to do and say whatever is necessary to respond to someone who says, gee, how could you give that up? You've been working that on for 5 years. You've got a lot of investment. Why would you want to take a change now? And you can say, well, because that's what I've chosen to do at this point of my life, and these are the good points because I've done my homework.
The term celebration of diversity has been used. Can you explain what that means and how it fits into this change?
Yes, I think one of the steps that we're attempting to take as a total society is to develop a sense of community by celebrating the diversity of our society. Very often our institutions have looked upon bringing in minorities and women into opportunities to be hospitable to them. We talk about bringing in minorities into our university, for example. We want it to be a hospitable environment. That's not enough. It's not enough just to invite people to come in. It's important that the whole institution, the whole organization become enriched by and changed by the full participation of persons from various cultures that make up our society. This is a tremendously diverse country, and this is certainly a very diverse state, and our institutions are not reflecting that diversity at this point. So when I use the term, I think when others use the term, I presume they mean, as I think I do, this notion of not just tolerating but celebrating the diversity and finding ways to celebrate that and fully allow for participation within our culture.
It seems to me that one of the beauties of that too is that it allows everyone to be freer.
Yes, that's right.
Also, those people who have been in traditional roles, it allows them to be freer and to enrich their lives as well.
That's right.
I just must respond to the President of University of Idaho's comments. I'm president of an organization called the Northwest Coalition Against Malicious Harassment. We're a six-state organization. And one thing that we are learning in our process of working with like Youth Council on human rights is that you put it so well that we do not just tolerate differences, we celebrate those.
That's right.
And that's a very important. Now, I will follow up on that with you, Dr. Zinsser. One thing we're finding in our study, both for primary schools, secondary schools, and college universities, we have such a very limited, almost non-existent curriculum that deals with multicultural
That's right.
programs. What do we need to do and what can we do in this area? Because it has a role for women, it has a role for minorities and
It sure
others
does.
as we learn to live together in a much better way than we have in the past.
Yeah, I can share my own personal views on that, and it's a tremendous debate or dialogue that's going on throughout higher education right now and has been heating up quite a bit in the last few years. I'm glad of that, frankly, where we're getting into this tension between the coherence and integrity of the Western culture, the Western civilization that we've been teaching all these years, and indeed that is the culture that has dominated the development of this country as we know it, at least as the society as we know it. And that Western culture is what has taught us principles such as freedom and equality and so on. So we do celebrate that, and we don't want to break up that coherence. On the other hand, we must begin to think in terms of a world civilization, both at home and abroad, and bring into our curricula perspectives of other cultures within our society that have not been heretofore recognized or some early masters, painters, women writers that went under male names for all these years because they couldn't be recognized any other way. Many of these works are being discovered and found to be of equal merit, if not in some cases greater merit than some of the historically recognized masters, and be open-minded enough to examine them on their merits and bring them in. I do not believe that work should be brought in on a political basis. I don't think something should be in the curriculum because it was written by a woman or written by a black or written by a Native American or a Hispanic or a white person, but that the works are reviewed and put into the curriculum because of their meaning, because of and on their merits. And if we do that with a real open mind intellectually and in our hearts as well as in our minds, we will find that our curricula in Western civilization will be enriched. And as we begin to look at other cultures around the world, all of us must recognize today how important it is for us to think on a world basis. Now that's asking a lot of our curricula in a 4-year undergraduate curriculum. At this point, 40% of our graduates are graduating in 4 years. The rest of them are graduating in more than 4 years, and that's true across the nation. So we're already expanding our curriculum, and I think we need creative ways to synthesize these elements of our curriculum so we don't just keep adding on courses and having students going to school for 7 years.
And there's also some resistance from those who teach because it requires updating in their case.
And retraining, tremendous change.
Risk taking.
That's right, and we have to help them find ways of taking that risk. That's right.
And I'd like you to continue to build on what Dr. Zinsser has said.
Well, I really do. I certainly agree and reiterate what Elizabeth said. At the same time, I think that in a lot of ways in this country we have been relatively isolated with not particularly by design, but we felt fairly self-contained. We've been very self-sufficient, a young country that's growing and changing. And we have been able to absorb the various immigrations of people from various places, and in a way sort of form them into the American shape, whatever that diverse form is. I think that right now, and coming from the state of California, where we have immense, broad expanse of people from many, many cultures, European, Central, South American, Asian, and there are so many that it is a little harder to absorb those people into the system and into the existing way of life, and certainly in the colleges and university and all the way down the school system, to absorb this wide range of experiences and backgrounds, I think is becoming increasingly different. Then it becomes incumbent upon us, I think, to be a whole lot more understanding and actually walk in the moccasins, as the old saying goes, of these other groups of peoples with very diverse backgrounds, to understand them. It becomes incumbent upon us with that understanding as much as it is upon them, which we've expected them to adapt in the past. Now I think we have to, of the major culture, if you want to say the American culture here in the United States, to adapt and understand the wide diversity that is around us, because it certainly does enrich us.
Janelle Burke.
I would like to talk just for a minute about cooperation. As change occurs, it's necessary to have great amounts of cooperation between individuals. That could be true in a family setting, it could be true in an institutional setting, it can be true in a society, in the setting of society. Diana, would you like to start with some of that, what your feelings are about cooperation as change occurs and how necessary it is?
Well, one of the really cogent points, I think, when you talk about risk-taking is gathering support. That you may be prepared to take a risk yourself, but let's say you're a married woman, and whatever you do, whatever choice you make, major job change, for example, or a career advancement that might ask you to move to another place, or it might be to go back and get an advanced degree. Then when you make those choices, that reflects immediately, it has repercussions on the rest of the family, and you need to have their support wholeheartedly to be able to make those changes. It certainly is true that a lot of times you don't get that support, and then you have to reevaluate your situation and decide whether it's worth the risk anyway without the support. And surely, in taking care of ourselves, we can make those kinds of risks even without the support, but we do have to understand clearly the cost that it may bring to bear on the rest of the people around us.
Dr. Zinsser, how do you think that women can become more influential and more powerful in our society? And perhaps starting with 3 or 4 solid suggestions that you would have about ways that women can improve their status in the society.
Well, one of them is on the theme of cooperation, actually, to tie together your last question with this one, and that is I think women have perhaps in some ways a special ability to face an argument or a conflict with an orientation towards reaching agreement. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that some men don't have that also and that some women don't, but I think that there is, I've noticed a fairly solid theme among the way in which a lot of women seem to think when they approach a problem. And so rather than approaching a situation or a conflict, because our society and our family lives and all the rest are so increasingly complex that the best way to learn to cooperate, it seems to me, and to reach cooperation is to be able to have a good argument. A good argument meaning one that leads to change, effective and positive change for all of the partners in that argument, if you want to put it that way. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Now, if our conception of leadership and affecting change through conflict resolution, argument, whatever word we want to use for it, is to impose our will on others, I don't think we'll achieve very much. But if our orientation is, I don't know what the outcome of this is going to be, but I'm willing to engage in and provide leadership to a process that is oriented to reaching agreement. It's a form of communication. I think it's something that's being studied more today than ever before, in part because they're observing, some scholars in sociology observing these processes in the way in which women think when they get into conflict resolution situations.
I think also traditionally, in a traditional lifestyle and past experience in acculturation, because women really do grow up in a different culture than men do, is that we are not accustomed to asking for what we want and to stating our opinions very clearly. We see ourselves very often in a supportive role and have not been very clear on what our aims are and what we ourselves want for ourselves or for our group or whoever we represent.
So you're saying a little assertiveness training is going to make women more
It
powerful?
doesn't hurt. And of course, assertiveness, I think, sometimes is translated as aggressiveness when it applies to women, where it's not ordinarily seen that way as it applies to men. And by assertiveness, I think that Elizabeth said earlier that we have to be very clear that it's in spirit of cooperation, that it's simply a statement of where we're going and the direction that we see, and making our point of view stated very clearly so that it is understood.
And I think there's a fine line.
Yes,
because
indeed.
we can take that position and say, I want to be clearer now about my position and what I want, because I haven't been acculturated to that. But at the same time, we have to be open, as all people have to be open, to possibly not getting it quite the way we want it. And we're not going to achieve cooperation unless we're able to provide leadership in a relational situation, in a communication relational situation, open to coming up with an outcome that isn't exactly what we may have stated. So both, I think, we have to be more assertive, but also effective in leading to answers that are increasingly community answers, not individual answers.
Again, I'm afraid that we have a lot of biases left in our society. And I go back to politics because my field is political science. And when women enter politics and if they run for statewide office, at our conference last weekend, we had one of the most brilliant speakers I've heard from Arizona. She ran for governor 4 years ago, Arizona. She's a brilliant speaker, but she addressed somewhat this issue that in politics oftentimes it's very necessary to be most aggressive in dealing with public policy. And isn't there a very special challenge because of the bias that women, as they are aggressive, oftentimes will be labeled, as she said, in a very negative connotation, but without that it's difficult to be successful. Doesn't it take a special challenge? And how do you deal with that?
Well, I think it does take it is a special challenge. At the same time, certain kinds of behavior is appropriate in certain environments. And I think the perception of what is aggressive or what is assertive is partly on the part of the perceiver as well as on the part of the person who's exhibiting that behavior. And that exactly the same behavior may be considered in a negative way on the part of a woman. If she is extremely assertive, that may be perceived as being aggressive.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're out of time. I have the signal. I wish we could continue. We just got started. On behalf of Janelle and our staff, I want to thank both of you. It was a most informative program, and we appreciate your cooperating to be here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
I know you have enjoyed our program. It has been extremely informative, and I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week when we will continue with part 2 from the Women's Forum in Coeur d'Alene, and we will discuss such other issues as how to deal with challenges in business and debt. And please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time. Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the second program in our 2-week series entitled Personal and Professional Growth. Once again, we deeply appreciate the cooperation of the Women's Forum Incorporated, which is located in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. This is their 8th annual conference, and each year they've been most supportive of allowing us to have their guests on this particular program. Today we're very, very pleased to welcome to our program Carol Shelton Walker. Our guest is the president of Carol Walker's Financial Fitness Program. It is a consumer counseling and debt liquidation firm with headquarters in Idaho Falls, Idaho. Currently, there are 5 branch offices, 3 in Idaho and 2 in Utah. Our guest has authored the book entitled How to Succeed in Business Without Being a Man. Carol, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our program. We look forward to some very, very important answers to questions concerning the whole issue of business and the role of women in business and the issue of debt and how we deal with putting our finances in order. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Carol, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you come to be interested in the financial area?
Well, Janelle, my background involves being involved in investment real estate. I actually had a securities brokerage firm and a real estate brokerage firm, and most of my time was spent in helping people learn how to make money. And I discovered in that process that it isn't so much how much you make as it is how much you are able to organize and plan how you save and take care of what you make. And so primarily the background that I had was involved in insurance, real estate, and securities.
And you had a personal experience, I believe, that led you to become concerned about financial management in addition.
That's correct. In fact, I had a young daughter who was attending the University of Utah. She graduated from the university in the high honor roll, upper 2% of the nation. The month that she graduated from college, she received in the mail an American Express card, a Visa card, a MasterCard, and a check from a finance company advising her that she had credit of $2,500 and all she needed to do was sign the check. Well, for a young girl who had sacrificed a great deal to put herself through school and then coming out of college, being offered a very good job, and now being made available the wonderful world of credit, it was too much of a temptation. And within 14 months, this beautiful young girl was deeply in debt. It wasn't long before I started receiving telephone calls. Mom, could you loan me a couple $100 this month? I can't quite make all my payments. Or Mom, could you please help me make my car payment this month? One evening she called at home in absolute desperation, and her lament was, I'm a failure. I can't manage my money. And here, 14 months earlier, she had been at the pinnacle, graduating from college, great job, and now she's deeply in debt and feeling like a total failure in her life. It was at that point that I said, it's time for you to get some help. Not only do you need someone to help you reorganize your finances, but you need to take some good classes on money management, budgeting, getting out of debt. And she said, where do I go for help? So I said, there's got to be somebody, just look in the phone book. And as she went through the phone book, everyone that had the name financial, she called. She found financial planners, brokers, security salesmen, insurance salesmen. But when she mentioned that she was in deep trouble financially and needed help, no one was available to help her. Well, that gave me the inspiration, which I've always believed, if you want to succeed at anything, find an unmet need and fill it better than it's ever been filled before. And that was the inspiration for starting a company to help people become financially fit and overcome the trauma of overextended debt.
And I think she is not alone.
Absolutely
there are certainly
not.
many other people who find this, and of course we're almost keyed into it, the born to shop relationship that we sometimes read about with women. We're almost keyed into it. So she's not alone either among college students having large debts.
Not at all. In fact, a commentator made the comment that the average high school student or the average college student within 4 years of college graduation will be in excess of $100,000 in debt and have that burden to carry to work themselves out of. So the problems of debt are not peculiar to my daughter. Most young people coming up and starting out in life start out with a big, big burden of debt on them as they begin.
You really have sparked my interest with something you said to me on the way down to the program, and you indicated it's not necessarily how much money an individual makes that will make them financially secure, but rather it is how one organizes their funds. Could you elaborate upon that statement?
That's correct. In fact, the word budget has always had a negative connotation. We think of budgeting as budget bargain basements and budget motels, and it seems to have an association of poor. If you're poor, then you go on a budget. Absolutely the reverse is true. People that are very wealthy organize their finances. There isn't any business that would start up and succeed that didn't have a balance sheet at the end of every month, that would see what came in, what went out, and where it went, so that they would be able to get a picture of what they need to do to be more successful. Well, as families, we're the most important business that exists. But how many times do we have a balance sheet at the end of every month as to what came in, what went out, and where it went, so that we know if we need to make changes? If we could learn to organize our finances and allocate out our spending categories, we would be like the successful business that keeps very close track of what their progress is in terms of their financial future.
Let's talk a little bit more about that in detail from the perspective of the family. If you were doing a workshop, and I know you do workshops and all those kind of things, but let us use our viewers who are sitting at home today, and you work with them in what little time we have here together. What are some of the steps or recommendations you have for putting a family budget together?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be done is you have to determine where your money is being spent, because every family is different. A family of 5 children is going to have a different spending pattern than someone who is a single parent. And so what you do, the best way to get started, is to go back over your spending habits of the last 3 months, if 6 months if possible. We kind of encourage an exercise of just going back through the canceled checks, sitting down at the table, and putting them all in categories. This was for groceries, this was for utilities, this was for clothing. And then you divide up those checks by the number of months that you've made this exercise. That begins to give you a picture of where you as a family are spending your money. By using that exercise, then you begin to establish categories for how you're going to allocate your present income. Now, if your spending patterns of the past indicate that you are spending more than your income is, then you have to bring into balance how that income is going to be distributed into the categories that you've determined you need for your family. Once those categories are established, then you allocate out. I am going to spend $300 a month for food. I am going to spend $50 a month for clothing. And you establish what we call a little monthly budget register that slips down into your wallet just like a checkbook register. The difference is that you're keeping track of spending categories instead of a checkbook balance. And each category has an allocated amount. As you make expenditures out of that category, in 7 seconds you make the entry into your little budget book. You will have a running total continually of where you are financially in each of those various categories. You have to treat each category as a separate bank account, however, so that when you've allocated $300 a month for groceries and you've spent $265, you know that you only have $35 left and that you cannot overdraw the account. Now, you may have a lot of money left in your checking account, but you don't have any money left in that budget category. Where people get into trouble is that they'll have an impulse to buy something. They'll look at their checkbook and see that they do have a little bit of money left without realizing that that's been allocated somewhere else. And they spend it, and now they're in trouble because the money that was being held in the checkbook isn't there for the other category that was supposed to have gone to.
This may be almost heresy in the day in which we live, but part of that problem could be in relation to what you've already talked about, and that's having such access to credit with the credit cards. There are people that I have met that indicate to me that they finally have had to destroy their credit cards because they absolutely have no control with that easy access. Do you ever recommend that individuals that have this kind of disciplinary problem or self-disciplinary problem that they don't use credit cards?
Yes, we do. In fact, one of the first things that we do when someone comes into the Financial Fitness Center is we determine what their ratio of debt is to income. And it's very important that an individual understand what their ratio of debt is, because we can look at our financial picture and see if there are some warning signals that say you're overextending. The national average says that your consumer debt ratio should be about 13% of your income, and it should not exceed that. Now that's not counting your home mortgage or your car payment. This is consumer debt. If it's determined that your consumer debt is way in excess of that ratio, if it's up in 20 or 25%, for example, then we recommend that you stop using credit immediately, because if you continue in that path, you're going to be visiting the friendly bankruptcy attorney. And so we do encourage that you eliminate the use of credit when your debt ratio is out of bounds. One of the other things that we teach in the centers, however, is we teach how to use credit cards correctly. You can actually use credit to your advantage if you do it properly. And we encourage, if someone uses their MasterCard or their Visa card for a purchase, that they subtract the amount of that purchase immediately out of their checking account, as though they had written a check for it. Then they make a notation in the checkbook that this was done by MasterCard, an MC or V for Visa or AX for American Express. And when the bill comes in at the end of the month, there's money in the bank to pay it. Then they write the check for the bill, go back into the check register, and now fill in the check number. You may have 4 or 5 items that were purchased on that credit card, but each one of them have been properly deducted from the checking account, and you don't run into trouble with a balance that you can't pay off.
Thank you. Janelle Berg.
On our last program that dealt with women, we talked about changes that were occurring. Sometimes, I think in a family, they may be going along and suddenly there's unemployment, or there's a change in marital status, or something happens that's rather catastrophic. How do you suggest that people deal with that? And they suddenly find themselves much shorter. I don't think we have any trouble when we find ourselves much longer.
Right.
It's when we find ourselves much shorter.
One of the sad commentaries of our nation is that our savings accounts are declining terribly. That is evidenced by the problems with the savings and loan difficulties, the banks. We are a nation that has acquired through borrowing instead of through savings. One of the ways to avoid these crises that occur is to establish what we call an emergency fund. Every family should have in that emergency fund at least 3 months worth of income, if possible 6 months worth of income, that they start acquiring in a small amount of money being put aside every single month. Then when a crisis occurs that is unplanned or unexpected, they have something to fall back on that will help them over the hump until that repair can be made that has caused the problem in their life. And so our recommendation is that even when you are financially strapped, that you begin a little bit at a time to prepare for an emergency fund through a savings account. It's inevitable that all of us in our lifetime have things occur that we have not planned for. If we just have a little bit of reserve, it can help us at a time when all the world seems to be falling apart and we have nothing to fall back on.
Do you have, as clients in your center, an equal number of men and women, or do you find that you have one or the other more?
Yes, we have an equal number of men and women. However, I must say that it's the women that call and make the appointments. They're generally more conscientious about making sure that their finances are under control. The men always come in with them because we encourage that they come as couples. Finances is a family matter, and you need to be working together. But it's an equal number of those that get into financial difficulty. Doesn't seem to have any preference.
And do you find that in families there will be a spender and a person who hoards, or do you find that sometimes there are 2 spenders in a family?
Both. It's often interesting, the interaction between the husband and wife when they come in for their first interview, and we begin to go through budget items, and sometimes they get very heated. The husband will, as we go through the budget item and we'll talk about allowances, the wife will retort to him that if you didn't give the children so much money every time they asked, we wouldn't have this problem. Or he will answer back, well, if you'd enter the grocery bill in the checkbook, we wouldn't be in trouble. And it becomes a very interesting exercise to discover that part of the financial difficulty they're having is the lack of communication between each other. So we do find that it takes a little more than just working on finances to bring things back in balance. In fact, as a result of our experience, we have developed a curriculum, And our third course in the series is how to deal with stress and finances. And we find that that's a very popular course because finances out of control is one of the major factors of creating great stress in a family relationship.
I know you get a variety of problems that are brought to you, and it's very rewarding to those clients that you have that you in many cases can assist them in getting things on a sound footing again. But I would suspect that you have some cases where they are so deeply in debt. Can they ever resolve that, or must they take bankruptcy and start all over?
We're finding that bankruptcy certainly is a last resort. And there are times when it is the only solution. That had they been able to get in for help or assistance earlier, maybe it could have been avoided. If their income has stopped or they've had extreme medical pressures that they just simply could not find any way to handle, there are occasions when bankruptcy is the only solution. However, we have discovered that too often bankruptcy is the first option instead of the last resort. We have found people that are only $6,000 or $7,000 in debt that are applying for bankruptcy, and they could work their way out of it. We are certainly in the centers not a quick fix. We are one in which we help people work through a difficult situation, but we don't take on their responsibility. We help them to learn to handle that responsibility with some assistance.
Aren't some individuals too under the false impression that even though it's a smaller amount, like 5, 6, or 7,000, they think bankruptcy is a simple solution, but there are some real disadvantages to taking bankruptcy, isn't there?
Absolutely, and it's becoming more and more evident that it isn't the easy solution that it used to be. Because of the increasing number of bankruptcies that have been filed, the courts are now looking at the law again to see if it hasn't been too lenient, and that now they're considering requiring a thorough investigation of those who file bankruptcy. So many fraudulent bankruptcies have taken place. Bankruptcy had appeared at one time that there was no stigma to it. Everybody was doing it, and the comment was, well, my neighbor down the street just filed bankruptcy and now he's driving a new car, so it must not be a difficult situation. But bankruptcy stays on your record for 10 years. Creditors are not overlooking it. They are now seriously considering when someone has filed a bankruptcy, even though they may have cleared their obligations, they are not good credit risks, and credit is not being extended as easily as it once was to those who filed a bankruptcy.
I want to move in another area because we have not talked about your book, How to Succeed in Business Without Being a Man. Would you tell us the basic thesis, and in doing so, are there still great challenges if a man goes out to start say a small business and a woman goes out with credit and so forth? Is there still biases that she has more of a challenge in getting her business started than a man, or getting it financed?
I think that bridge has been built. It's much easier for a woman to start a new business now than it was at the time that I went into business, for example. And in fact, the purpose of the book, when it was written, was to help women understand that they could achieve and accomplish whatever they wanted to in life. That just because they were women, they did not need to be held back, that they could succeed. They could go on and even become millionaires if that's what they wanted to become. And it was very much along the lines of what Diana spoke about today, was we make choices, and we have the freedom to make choices. We can choose to stay home, or we can choose to go to work, and we can choose to be successful as we go to work. Actually, my experience in business was a result of having to survive. So many times things happen in our lives that we didn't plan for, as Janelle pointed out, and that was what happened in my life. I was left with a young family to raise very early, and I had the option of either feeling sorry for myself, looking for someone to bail me out of my problems, or pull myself up by the bootstraps and make life what I wanted it to be. And I chose the latter, and fortunately in the process I discovered women can do anything that they want to do if they have enough of a desire. They can succeed in business.
Janelle Burke.
Along that same line, does it take a lot of money to get involved in a business, or can you get into a business without a great deal of capital?
It doesn't take a lot of money at all. Let me give you a quick example. I know of a lady who lived in northern Utah who was a farmer's wife, and she had a little sewing business on the side. She made clothes for people. Her husband died, and all of a sudden she was left as the breadwinner in the family. The farm was in debt, so there was no way to gain a subsistence out of the income from the farm. As she analyzed her situation, she discovered that the money that she was making from sewing was not adequate, didn't provide her with enough of an income, because she was so meticulous in the things that she made that she would put hours of time into wonderful, beautiful dresses that no one would be willing to pay the price for. So someone once said to her, "What are you going to do? You don't have enough money to start a business. The only thing you really know is how to sew. You can't make a living at sewing, so what are you going to do?" And then it occurred to her, through the experience that she'd had, that people would actually come and ask if they could borrow one of the wedding dresses that she had made. And her wedding dresses were the $700 variety, beautiful beading and lace. She began to make wedding dresses, and instead of selling them, she began to rent them. And she would rent them out for the evening of the wedding and the reception, or whatever time that it took for the ceremony to take place, and they would be returned, and she could rent them out again within another day. Well, as she built these wonderful, beautiful wedding dresses, she built an inventory, and she started a rental business. It didn't cost her anything more than she had already been doing sewing. She actually built her income up to where she was making $1,200 to $1,500 a week renting wedding dresses, and it didn't take anything to start. There are many, many opportunities where you can turn a hobby or something that you love to do into a business with very little investment. There are other things that you may want to go into that require an amount of money that has to be expended, but there are many places that is accessible through small business loans. Women are still considered a minority. There are minority loans that are made available. And if you have done your homework correctly, you can acquire the funds to start a business.
Along that same line, if the example you gave from the lady in Utah, there are others where you would have to have more capital than that because she had a talent and it was built in without a lot of finances. But there are some businesses where you have to have a certain amount of capital to start. What kind of recommendations would you make to a person that has not been involved in business before about what kind of presentation do you need to make to the financial institution so that you can assure them that there's a good chance of succeeding?
Well, I think you have to work out on paper exactly what you anticipate that business will bring in. You have to put together a financial package if you're going to go to a lender to acquire funds to finance a business. That package has to include what your costs are going to be and what they're going to be used for. Then you have to do a projection as to what that will return to you in the form of revenues. Those revenues have to be worked out over a period of first 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then many times 5 years. And you have to build into that a factor of increasing your business on a gradual scale. The banks are going to want to know how the money is going to be repaid. And so you have to be very careful in analyzing what revenues can be generated from what sources and how that debt will be retired. That's not a difficult exercise if you've already thought clearly out what your business is going to be.
And at your center, I know you concentrate on helping people out of financial trouble when they're in trouble, but do you have the service also if someone is not financially in trouble but they have this exciting idea of a new business? Will you assist in that also?
Well, actually, we have 3 programs that we offer. We offer a program for people who are in crisis, that have overextended, cannot meet their obligations, and have to have some assistance. They're stressed out, they can't deal with their creditors, and so we do negotiate with their creditors in their behalf. Then there is another program that we call the Fitness Training Program. This is for people who are not in crisis, but they say, I do my taxes every year, I make a lot of money, but I don't know where it all goes. I have nothing to show for it. And so we have a program where we do fitness training, we help implement a proper budget for them, we put that on our computer, give them weekly printouts, much like you would go if you were going to a weight loss center. They check in every week, we monitor how they're doing, and then we expose them to some of the things that they might do to change. The third program would be the one that you would be referring to, and that's what we call our quality of life program. This is primarily for people who are relatively affluent, but they are so busy doing the things that they want to do to make a living that they don't have time to sit down and do proper positioning. They want to expand their business. They're not sure exactly how to expand their business. They're so busy making a living. And so we implement a program that they sit down and work out that they would like to accomplish by way of goals. Then every quarter we have a counseling interview with them where we examine the quality of their life and what are some of the ways in which that could be improved, some of which are career changes, career decisions, enhancing their income, some of these opportunities to maybe expand a little further in what they're already doing. And we also talk to them about alternatives for getting their finances the maximum use, alternative housing, alternative health, alternative medicine, alternative transportation. And we keep them very much informed of the newest and latest research that's out on all of those subjects. So if they were to want to make an addition to their business or open another business, we would discuss all the possibilities of that, how to make that happen.
I have the signal that we're out of time again. It's like last week, it has passed so fast. On behalf of Janelle Burke and our staff, we thank you so much, Carol, for being here. It's been, I know, very, very productive, and I'm sure we have viewers who will benefit, and some of them may even contact your center. Thank you again.
And thank you, Troy and Janelle. I enjoyed being with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have had a 2-week series with you on personal and professional growth. We want to thank the 8th Annual Conference of the Women's Forum Incorporated in Coeur d'Alene for providing these guests to us. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, and we will discuss what we believe is a very significant issue. Until that time, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.